Not sure why. I'm not too used to Zoom. We use a team, so I apologize. Let me try to.
Mr. Caller, yeah, Mr. Caller, recommendation is, can you send your PowerPoint to Mr. Tahi so that he can put it on screen here?
Oh, that's perfect. I'll do that.
Okay. Shoot. Yeah. So we do apologize. We're going to have a little stall right here.
All right, Mr. Tahi, that's coming to you right now.
All right.
Maybe it's coming to you over email.
I think that file is. I haven't gotten it in.
David, how big is your file? Is it a pretty big file?
Well, let's see. Yeah, it's 17 megs.
Yeah,
That's a really big file, yeah.
That's too large.
yes.
Let me. Yep, let me PDF it for you. And it's the same version that we used last time during the meeting. If you guys have that handy.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, what about from the last meeting?
PDF.
Madam Chair, can you hear me now?
Yes, Donna and Chloe, we can hear you.
Okay, just double checking. Thank you.
They don't have it on this computer.
April 10th, I guess that's when the last date was. We'll try to report this on tomorrow. Okay.
All right, Mr. Tate, he just sent to you.
All right.
And this is just 2 megs. Excellent. So let's go to, I believe it was slide 3. Next slide. Yep. So this is where I was at there. Madam Chair, will this work?
Yes, that'll work.
Okay. Just making sure we're good. So we were talking about the tower inventory. As you can see on the screen there, over 600 towers were identified. And 228 of those are other co-locatable type structures. Taxes, we've talked about sales tax, the billing there of 630,000. We talked about rent collecting over $1.8 million and the annual billing of $1.2 million. The new regulations, which we'll go into more depth about here. VB has largely done their part. We've worked with the Department of Justice to complete the regulations and put it in the format that we believe the DOJ is comfortable with. And now we're just looking for final approval and signature post this workshop, of course. Repapering and papering of ground leases. There hasn't been a lot done due to the regulations not being complete at this point, but we're likely looking at over $7 million on an annual basis once that's done. And then, the streamlining the process, we're very far along in doing that. We've worked closely with GLDD to, get processes and procedures in place to get the tower leases and applications through in a efficient manner. Next slide. So regulations update, again, we're largely complete there. Just a short update that we gave you on the industry. There are 3 main carriers that are active. The new carrier, the new player is Dish. They are building out slower pace than the other 3 carriers, of course. But they have over 600 new leases that have come across the desk for Vertical Bridge last year. COVID-19, of course, slowed things down, but it did reinforce the need for communications infrastructure. Pending issues right now, we can go over that a little bit later, just to stay focused per Madam Chairman. And of course, Vertical Bridge is very active with Navajo Nation charitable organizations. Next slide. Next slide. All right, so Madam Chairman, I just wanted to see, do you want me to go through this tower inventory slide?
Yes.
Okay. So our tower inventory, 800 plus towers and structures identified. That goes back to the number we mentioned before, 600 towers and roughly 228 co-locatable structures. Nearly 850 towers and other structures have been identified and uploaded into the VB system. This represents over $7 million in annual fees to the nation. And VB has engaged with all known tower owners. And, as we want to stress with the regulations, co-locators should be paying rent to the nation. In the past, the Navajo Nation has not been collecting taxes on any tower structure, so that's something we would also want to update via the regulations. Rent collection to date, we've received over $1.3 million in back billing. Large pending back bills are pending. A little tongue twister. And the Navajo funds VB is regularly remitting to the nation. Site audits are nearly done. This is where we've gone out across the nation to identify towers that, we didn't know, or the Navajo Nation didn't know who owned the tower or the structure. So we put a list together and put all of that in one place. Next slide. Other items that we're working on. The FirstNet deployment is underway. ComNet has completed most of the FirstNet co-locations. Lack of regulations, we believe, is affecting the rollout. We've had discussions with the Navajo Tax Department and in light of putting the regulations together. We feel that there have been some tower owners that were out there that we found through the course of the audit that were not following through either with their initial agreement or just weren't following through at all with the nation. So that's something we want to rectify as well. We've had multiple discussions with all major carriers. And we hope with the regulations that the fact that we're streamlining the process will help them get a little more comfortable with continuing to build on the nation there. And we have provided NLD, GLDD, and NNTRC our KMZ file with all known towers and co-locatable structures that we found through our audit. We believe this will also help aid broadband deployment as we can determine where the assets are located and where more are needed. VB and the Navajo Nation have made tremendous improvements in the process. The nation does have access to the VB partner portal. Just a snippet of that is below. And we think that's been working really well. Next slide. And we don't have to go through the vertical bridge travel network line by line, but just, you know, every year Vertical Bridge allocates 1% of its adjusted tower cash flow to this charitable network, and it's a big part of what we do. For the nation itself, we've donated over $60,000 to dig deep under the Navajo Water Project, which provides water and electricity to Navajo families. Next slide. Next slide. This is just something I want to just make sure we key on as we talk about the regulations and what we're doing here today. You know, we have a timeline where Vertical Bridge completed the draft of the regulations back in 2020, May 2020. The nation submitted the draft for industry comment in May of 2021. Final comments were received in August of 2021. And NNTRC unanimously approved the regulations in February 2022. And there's an additional timeline behind this that goes a couple of years, more than a couple of years, a few years to get to that point. And right now we're waiting on the full review by the nation and tribal council before full signature and enactment. We did receive preliminary industry comments. I believe we actually sent the regulations out a couple of times for review by the industry. We did have reasonable and even-handed comments come back, and we made sure that we incorporated those into the regulations. Next slide. So this is a very important slide. You know, why are we doing this? Why are we putting these regulations together? Well, we want to create uniformity and consistency in the application of law. You know, we want to eliminate any waivers, you know, side agreements, special deals that have gone on in the past that haven't either been recorded or haven't been followed through. We want to have transparency for the nation. We want equal treatment for all parties. We want a transparent application of the laws to all the parties, and we want approved forms of leases and other documents. We also want a streamlined process and procedure to expedite deployment. And this will, you know, and we'll talk about it in the next bullet point, will definitely bring about more interest from other carriers and other suitors there that want to build towers in the nation, because they see that process is in place. It'll also help with, you know, getting the approvals for grazing officials, getting approvals from the chapters, when we have a process and procedure in place that everybody can follow. Revenue generation, you know, we want to pass legislation that is uniform and consistent, transparent, equally applied to everyone, with a streamlined approval process that will encourage private party investment and the deployment of broadband across the nation, which is so essential. You know, increased deployment means better service and coverage for the Navajo people, for emergency services, for education, and it will also generate revenue. Next slide, please. And we don't need to go through the industry update, Madam Chairman. I think that's just a good recap of what we talked about in the last meeting.
Okay, thank you, David, for that presentation.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to go ahead and allow some time to Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. Again, you know, being an enterprise to the Navajo Nation, I know that NTUA has cell phone towers. So if we can just get information from Navajo Tribal Utility Authority in regards to their inventory of cell towers on the Navajo Nation. So I don't know who wants to present that information.
Madam Chair and honorable RDC members, I'm Neil Grohl, Communication Systems Manager with NTUA. Here are some of the concerns with regulations and lease. They rescind existing land documents and agreements, Fees are far too excessive to attract carriers to expand into the remaining unserved and underserved areas and may even reduce existing broadband and cellular services. Carriers want to know the rules, but they also want to know that the rules will not arbitrarily change and the fees must be reasonable. The proposed fees are significantly more than the carriers pay off nation. There's no defined impartial appeal process.
Excuse me. So this, the information that you're bringing up, is actually for item C. It's a discussion on the inventory of cell towers on Navajo Nation. What I would like to hear from Navajo Tribal Utility Authority right now is just to get information from NTUA of how much inventory of cell towers that NTUA presently operates here throughout the Navajo Nation. So,
Well, NTUA has approximately 100 structures. All of those structures are not co-located structures. A lot of the structures are monoposed at chapter houses serving the chapter house. Some of the structures provide co-location. And some of the structures that are at the chapter houses and provide co-location are providing infrastructure communication services for NTUA utilities, electric, water, and gas through AMI, which is monitoring system and control systems.
okay, so right now, I do appreciate that information. So with that, inventory of cell towers, so we'll get further into the discussion under item C. I just wanted to get information and just get a general understanding of how much a cell tower inventory that NTUA presently owns as a nonprofit, so or operating right now. So we'll definitely come back around to NTUA with the presentation that you are ready to present, okay?
Okay.
Now, the next the department is the Navajo Telecommunications Regulatory Commission.
Madam Chair,
Honorable Simpson.
thank you, Madam Chair, and members of RDC. And yes, thank you. Madam Chair, you know, we do have other service providers. And I believe they're present here.
Mhm.
And I believe that they should be allowed to speak on to how many towers they have out there too. I see choice here. I see Secret Wind. So if we can allow that to happen too, to get information of these service providers. How many towers they have on the Navajo Nation, Madam Chair.
Okay,
Honorable Delegate Simpson, we also online have CTIA, who represents the three major carriers, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile.
and I believe Navajo Nation Shopping Center is also here. Yes. So again, today, the discussion, yes, lies around, you know, trying to get information on the other service providers. And I believe that's what the understanding was when we had exit from the last meeting at NTUA. So right at this point, I'd like to give it to Navajo Telecommunication Regulatory Commission. And from there, I can go ahead and have choice. So let's, you know, answer precisely to just the inventory of cell towers that you all have right now. And then we'll go further in depth when we come to the discussion under item C. And I'll give it to choice, Sacred Wind, Navajo Nation Shopping Center, and CTIA as well. I know that there was an alliance as well. What is the name of the?
Alliance for Navajo Broadband.
Okay. Alliance for Navajo Broadband. And so again, let's go ahead and keep it to the questions, but we'll go further into a more in-depth discussion under item C. So at this point, if I can allow Navajo Telecommunications Regulatory Commission to give information on your cell towers inventory.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
all the ETC statutes that are here. For the NNTRC, we kind of follow the same lead with that vertical bridge. And we're following, kind of keep it in tune with vertical bridge on there. And we have over 600 towers. I do have the map for that, but that kind of goes into section C. And at that time, I like for our commissioners to kind of step in, because this is kind of like where they were in the beginning before I came aboard, so they're pretty much in tune with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Charlie. So when you speak on behalf of the entity that you're going to be giving cell tower inventory, could you please give your name and your title and the entity that you are presenting? So next would be to Choice.
Good morning. Madam Chair. Thank you. Honorable delegates, one that hopefully to a Galena Association and the general manager of Choice into a reference. So answer the question about towers. NTUA Wireless is a last mile entity. We do not own any towers. We do co-locate on towers that belong to NTUA, SBI, Sacred Wind, and other carriers, middle mile carriers on the nation. So we heavily rely on their infrastructure to deliver service to our customers. We have over 100 sites that we have broadband and mobile services that we provide across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. The technology that we provide, one of the spectrum that is certified that is through the Navajo Nation lease is the EBS technology, which is a 2.5 gigahertz in Utah and Arizona. We also deliver CBRS technology or spectrum in all 3 states. So our technology, our towers, and the delivery of services are comprised of those 2 technologies, plus 600 megahertz and 100 megahertz. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Asosi. Yeah. Next would be to Sacred Wind.
Jag Teresa Hopkins and the Gene Schwarzenegger, which is changed for my decision on the Hopkins. I am the Director of Government and Travel Affairs at Sacred Winds. The services we provide on both middle mile and last mile, primarily extending fiber optic cabling. We do have some towers throughout the Navajo Nation, which we use to extend the network, and I believe we have less than 25 throughout Navajo. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Hopkins. Next, I'd like to go ahead and give it to Navajo Nation Shopping Center, Inc.
Police member, Aaron. Councils. Executives, and Nicholas Taylor, okay. Chief Executive Officer, in Navajo Nation Shopping. We are one of 4 retail property landlords across Navajo Nation. In the Navajo Nation, there are 13 shopping centers. We own and control 9, 13. The other 9 currently have similar license agreements with 4 locations. Those 4 locations are the Yenta, Kenyon, Timberlock, and Shimrock shopping centers. And in aggregate, we service about 3.2 million folks annually at these centers. So a lot of people use those centers and utilize these services.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Next, I'd like to go ahead and give it to CTIA. Please state your name.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Matt DeTora, and I'm the Counsel for External and State Affairs at CTIA. With regard to the inventory question alone, we don't have statistics on the individual carrier inventory on the nation at this time because we're a trade association, but we've communicated with our members to try to get you the information individually to the extent possible.
I appreciate that, Matt. Thank you so much. Next to Alliance Navajo Broadband.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Jesus, and thank you to the RDC committee. I really appreciate your time to talk. We are not a carrier and we are not a,
Could you please state your name?
oh, my name is Joy. I'm the executive director for the Alliance of Navajo Broadband. We are not a carrier. We are a nonprofit organization that works for the advocacy of Navajo Broadband. So, but if I may, I'd like to add that Cellular One is also carrier.
Thank you. So the next one that I have is Mr. Brian Gilbert, with Cell One.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, staff. Yes. Brian Gilbert, I'm representing Smith Bagley Incorporated, DBA Cellular One. We've operated on the Navajo Nation since 1996. We are, of course, a mobile and broadband provider. We do own tower structures. We've actually participated in a couple of inventories over the past 20 years. The latest being what Local Bridge has done. They could have our final counts, an exact number. That changes quite a bit. I know that Cellular One's current inventory of towers is somewhere over 70 structures. We also co-locate our network on other structures and towers on the nation as well. So our network is on towers and it's co-located on other location structures. I have other information. I assume that we will have an opportunity to speak in the final section of this agenda, but you only wanted to hear from us on the inventory. So that's what I can say.
Okay,
Thank you.
well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Gilbert, for that information. Do we have anyone else that we might have missed? Could you state your name and the entity?
I work with Navajo Technical University. I'm the vice president of operations at Navajo Tech. Currently, Navajo Tech does own 18 tower sites, namely for backhaul services that provide redundancy for our campuses across the reservation. It should be noted that with the pandemic, we were forced to go to online learning. Because of that, we've been able to build up our resources. In fact, now we offer 9 totally online degrees. So co-location and collaboration with the existing carriers across the reservation is permanent, stressing the need for the actively provide our educational services to the reservation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone giving information in terms of how the current operation is staggered across the Navajo Nation. And we're talking about cell towers to fiber optic lines, to co-locators, to rooftop developments. And I do appreciate everyone for sharing the information. Now, second, I'd like to go to item letter C, to have a Division of Natural Resources, the Navajo Telecommunication Regulatory Commission, to do a recap on what we is currently the final draft of the telecommunication regulations. Again, based off of these particular regulations that has been crafted, whatever is going to be the final product is going to be the regulation that will be dropped to legislation. Ms. Khan?
I don't like to interrupt you, but there was mentioned by Mr. N2A that there was another person on the line who represented T-Mobile and another big carrier. I don't know if you wanted that person to give the same data.
That was
CTIA, Matt. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you for, just reminding me, but I think we've got everyone on the call that, needs to present, their information in regards to service providers across Navajo Nation. So thank you for that, Ms. Khan. So, any callers on the call that possibly might be with another service provider that provides telecommunication services on the Navajo Nation that I might have missed? Going once, going twice. Okay. Going back to item C. So Division of Natural Resources. Who's going to be presenting? Etty.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Mr. Alona is currently, I guess, waiting to meet with President Nygren, and he's not currently present, so he's not even on the call. Maybe we can skip him for now and defer to NNTRC, maybe the commission, I'm not sure. Do you want to head right now?
Well, to my understanding, this telecommunication regulations has been initiated by Division of Natural Resources. Is it in collaboration with Navajo Telecommunication Regulatory Commission? Go ahead and state your name and.
Good morning, Yate. My name is Nadine Kwa. I'm a launchman. Excuse me, Washington being. I am a board of commissioner with the NNTRC. And this power regulations have been going on for a while. But it was in concert with Navajo Land Departments. But we have Jim Dunstan, who can give you guys a history of the tower siting if you want to hear it online. And just so you can see how long it's taken us to get to this point. If you guys would like to hear that.
Mr. Brian Batsui, would he be able to, his own call?
I believe he would be able to answer the questions, but I'm not sure how familiar he is with this because he was at the GIS section of the land department. Mr. Halona would be the correct individual to be answering these questions regarding the teleregs. Madam Chair, I did text Mr. Halona to let him know that he's up to present. He did indicate that he's still at the office of the president and vice president.
Madam Chair, this is Byron Bisui.
Good morning, Mr. Bitsui. Right now, we are in a dilemma where we're supposed to have Mr. Halona, who was the previous department manager for Navajo Nation Land Department, when the telecommunication regulations was drafted. So I'm just curious if you are familiar with the telecommunication regulations, and would it be okay to have you present to the individuals that are present here in person and also on the call?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, I am unfamiliar with the regulations at this time. I would defer that back to Mr. Halona and Mr. Charlie with NNTRC.
So, Mr. Charlie, right now, Mr. Halona not being available, would you like to go ahead and take the lead and just give a recap on the telecommunications regulations that is currently in draft?
My recommendation would have earlier Jim Benson, who has the history behind it. Can speak on that behalf, that we use everybody up to date before we're at.
Okay, so Jim.
It is online.
Okay. Okay, so, Mr. Dunstan, are you able to give the group here in attendance an update or a recap on the telecommunication regulation, since we do not have Mr. Mike Colonna, present to, give a recap on the telecommunication regs that's currently in draft?
Yes, Madam Chair, I can speak to that. I believe that in the vertical bridge presentation, Mr. Calendar can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a slide was inserted in that presentation which contained a sort of timeline going back. David, is that correct? That slide is in your presentation as well?
Yeah, the latest presentation that was presented there is a kind of an abbreviated timeline. But the one, Jim, that you and I did together goes back even further, back to 2013.
Okay, so maybe if we could pull that slide back up so that everybody can sort of follow along as to the timeline of this. Would that be possible at this point, Madam Chair?
We should be able to, yes, Mr. Dunstan. Right now, just give time to Mr. Tahi to pull it back on screen.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I think it will help focus at least for the participants in terms of getting up to speed as to where we've been with these.
Which slide did you want us to pull back up?
David, do you know which?
Yeah,
slide?
I'm gonna, Mr. Tahi, I'm gonna send you a 3-page timeline. The one that you have there shows a timeline, but it's abbreviated. We want to show you the entire timeline. So just, if you can give me 1 minute, I'll shoot that to you.
Madam Chair, while we're waiting, can I make a comment?
Sure, let's keep it,
Very short.
yes.
Um,
Can you state your name for?
I'm sorry. Neil Burrell, Communication Systems Manager with N2A. I find it a little concerning that the only person that can talk to the regulations and the lease is Director Halona, when NNTRC will be enforcing the regulations, either Mr. Halona or Vertical Bridge. That's a concern. When NNTRC will be enforcing the regulations and the land department is enforcing the lease agreement. And it seems that there's only Director Halona and Vertical Bridge that are able to talk to this. I find it very concerning. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, for bringing that to RDC's attention. And again, I do apologize. Resources and Development Committee had inherited the draft of the telecommunications regulations. And I believe that there was a question that was posed at the last meeting when we had the meeting there at NTUA, was in regards to the pre and post activity of the telecommunication regulations as well. So with that, again, historically how these regulations were crafted, yes, it should be involving the Navajo Telecommunication Regulatory Commission, or even the broadband office at this point, because technically, and again, I get it that Navajo Nation Land Department or Division of Natural Resources is pretty much dealing with the land itself, and which is just a variable or a component to the telecommunication regulations. So I sincerely do apologize. This is where Resources Development Committee really does need to relook at who is really taking the lead in the telecommunication regulations right now with this current draft. And again, the work session here today was to really focus on bringing the service providers in and getting inputs and see if we could come to some sort of a consensus as to how we want to quantifiably structure this so that everyone leaving here today from the meeting would have an understanding of how the telecommunication regulations is going to be finalized as a final draft, that is. So with that, again, I do apologize. And again, this is a project that has happened with our predecessors from the 24th Council Resources and Development Committee. And I think that this, again, as I had mentioned, should have been properly structured so that everyone has, input across the board and seeing how it could be better crafted so that every service provider would have their input heard and see how it can be collectively crafted into the regulation. So I hope that everyone has a draft of the telecommunications siting regulations. You all have a copy of it. Okay, Ms. Neil?
Neil Brawls, N2A. It would appear to me that the carriers and service providers and stakeholders on the Navajo Nation have a very in-depth understanding of the regulations and the lease when they've only had access to those documents of 30, maybe 60 days at most. And the DNR, Land Department, and NTRC have been working on this for years. You would think they would be very familiar with them. I believe the stakeholders and carriers are very much more familiar with the regulations than the people creating them, other than Vertical Bridge. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Neil, for that. What I want to do is I just want to go ahead and give it back to Mr. Dunstan to finish out, just to recap information. From there, I would like to go ahead and just, since everyone has got a copy and you've already had the review process of these draft telecommunication siting regulations, then we can go ahead and go into discussion. I'm just going to go ahead and do it that way. So with that, Mr. Dunstan, I do give back the floor to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate it, and hopefully going through this timeline will put a little bit more context into these regulations and hopefully dispel some of the arguments that we're hearing that the carriers haven't had either adequate input or adequate time to review these. So by way of background, my name is Jim Dunstan. I'm outside counsel for an NTRC under contract to Navajo Department of Justice. I have been counseled in NTRC now for almost 15 years. And so I sort of have the full context and the history here. So if we begin on this slide, over a decade ago, in March of 2013, NTRC first approached this issue of trying to find a way to standardize leases, standardize the regulations, and produced a handbook in 2013. And then following on in July, proposing more standard tower leases, given all of the different types of contractual agreements that were floating around. And so in August of 2015, NTRC proposed a set of regulations which look similar to, but not exactly what you're now looking at. April 2016, we held a workshop, and then we issued a public notice seeking comments. In May of 2016, we received the comments from 5 of the carriers and incorporated those into a further draft. And next slide, please. So in February 2017, NTRC issued a further draft of regulations, And at that point, with change of administration, no further action was taken. In November of 2019, Vertical Bridge was retained as a consultant to assist both Land Department and NNTRC in picking this issue back up and drafting new regulations. In February of 2021, we issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, and NTRC did, seeking comment. In March, the comment period was extended. In April, April 2021, NTRC received 7 sets of comments. In May of 2021, NTRC published a revised draft accounting for some of these comments. And in June of 2021, NTRC received 5 additional sets of comments. Next slide, please. In November 4th, 2021, NTRC, along with Land Department, convened a workshop in Flagstaff at the casino there. With stakeholders, and then the following day held an open public hearing to get formal comments on the record. Follow up on that, Vertical Bridge then went back with further outreach to the stakeholders based on the workshop on November 4th. In February 2022, NNTRC held a work session to hear further concerns raised by the Alliance members. And on the 28th of February 2022, NNTRC presented the final version with the changes, and thereafter adopted those. Next slide, is there one more? Or is that it? I think that may be it. So at that point, with NNTRC's approval, the draft regulations went out. My understanding, well, I know this, I participated in this. One more round of comments were made by the Navajo Department of Justice and they were fairly minor changes to the regulations, basically to clarify the roles of both the Land Department and NNTRC to make them consistent with existing Navajo statute. The Navajo statute indicates that NNTRC is in the position to promulgate regulations and enforce those. But when it comes to the leases, that is in the power of the Land Department and not within NNTRC. So that's why the draft that you have before you has sort of a bifurcated system where NNTRC enforces the regulations, but in terms of enforcing the leases, that's over the Land Department. And so with that, I'll turn it back, Madam Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Mr. Dunstan, for that recap of information in regards to the timeline process of the crafting of these telecommunications siting regulations. At this point, I'd like to ask do I have legal counsel from Department of Justice, Natural Resources Unit on the call?
Hello, this is Veronica Blackhead with Navajo Nation Department of Justice.
Yate, thank you, Ms. Blackhat. So I just want to pose a question here, Ms. Blackhat. Now, these telecommunication siting regulations, I do understand that the leases fall under Navajo Nation Land Department, but the telecommunication regs actually is under Division of General Services, or even the administering by possibly even the Navajo Nation Telecommunication Broadband Office, where Mr. Tico Charlie is present here. So I'm a bit confused as the new Resources and Development Committee. It appears that Mr. Mike Colonna has been spearheading or actually taking the lead with these regulations at the inception of dialogues or discussions that have happened prior in 24th Council RDC. And at this point, there was a good argument that was made here, and I am in agreement with what Navajo Tribal Utility Authority had brought up in regards to the administering. So let me give you an example. Business site leasing regulations was initiated by Division of Economic Development under Navajo Nation. And Division of Economic Development, along with collaboration with Navajo Nation Land Department, got the regulations in place for business site leasing. But the business site leasing regulations, the administrative and management plan is being administered by Division of Economic Development. And they work with Navajo Nation Land Department for recording of any leases going forward. So right now, there's a separation of authorities that should be happening. And with that, could you please give Resources and Development Committee some clarity to this as to who should be the rightful department or division that should be taking the lead in crafting and finalizing the telecommunication siting regulations. So I'll go ahead and pose that question to you, Ms. Black Hat.
As was stated by Mr. Dunstan, there are different roles in the regulations. So I think, I don't think that it should just be one division overseeing all of this, because there's different aspects in the regulations pertaining to several different areas that are under the oversight of both the NNTRC and Land Department. So that was why Land Department was involved, and that was with respect to the leasing portion of it. And then enforcement of the regulations would be done by NNTRC. I don't know if that answers your question, but you know, the leasing authority from land comes from the general leasing regs. I'm not really sure, like, how to respond to that, other than to say that, you know, my understanding of the regulations was that it was initiated by Land Department, but because of the two different components under the regulations, it would require both the involvement of NNTRC and Land Department.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Black Hat. Honorable Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of RDC. Good morning again. Thank you, presenters, and all the guests who are here. Going off the timeline that was presented, it seems like a lot of public hearing. I just saw one date, and it seems like when this type of major regulations going to be implemented or amended, it definitely needs to go back to the people. And that's where I stand at. Because this will definitely impact our Navajo people that want to receive internet services. And it goes back to, you know, as NTA stated, you know, the costs or the leasing will be pretty high. And guess where that's going to be passed on to? Our Navajo people. And I think that's what our service provider carries here. We're trying to say, let's sit back down and work these things out. And I'm not sure what type of impact we'll have on these in a college or NTA that have towers out there. And they use our money, they use their money to provide education for our Navajo, get higher education for our Navajo people. And they have to pay more for towers. I believe 18 towers. I guess NTU stated there's 18 towers they have on the Navajo Nation. So they had to make higher payments under leasing. That takes money away from our students. So I'm not sure, like Madam Chair stated, you know, this has come from the 24th Council, and I did see it all dates back to 2013. And we're already facing, again, 2 weeks ago, we went to Albuquerque, and it's a big document too. And it's a resource management plan amendment. And it started back in 2013. And we have to deal with that too. Because there was no input from our leadership or the people. And that's where we came across it, that we had to take it back to the people. Even though many tribes are involved on this amendment, just want to use that analogy also, that we do the same thing here. I think in order for regulations to work, we got all have to have all the parties involved, not just one party making working with certain consultants. And the consultants have to understand our Navajo people, have to understand our Navajo Nation. And I really don't want the cost to be given to the people. We're already struggling with unemployment. We're already struggling with inflation. But we still need internet service or broadband to our Navajo people, because we have what we have gone through during the pandemic. All these, what we received during the pandemic, where our telecommunication service were paid for, internet service were paid for, it's going to stop. And you know the cost is going to go up there. And if the cost is going to be high through this regulation, we'll go back to a large number of people without internet services or broadband. So that's my big concern, Madam Chair. And I believe that in order to really have a good regulation, regulations within our internet service and broadband, this TSR, again, it goes back to, I want to definitely voice my concern for our Navajo people and Navajo Nation. Yes, we do need internet services, we do need broadband. We learned from the pandemic. This is a big, what we need, just what we definitely need for our Navajo people. I mean, for our students, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow again, next week. We hear all about these things coming out again. Monkeypox might spread again this summer. You know, we had spread that this morning. So we don't know what's going to happen. And so we're doing the same thing, but we started with during the pandemic. People calling in for meetings. We're still using that. So I think this whole using Zoom will stick with us. And I think a lot of our young people, we can get internet service at affordable cost, continue at affordable costs. I think a lot of our Navajo students will excel academically wise. Because you see off the reservation, we have cities, towns, and we have access to internet. That's what students are very successful in their school. For our Navajos, you know, how can you do your homework if you're sitting at a chapter? I probably can stay, if I was a student, I probably could stay at chapter maybe 1 hour. Winter time, the car running, the vehicle running, you try to do your homework. And I appreciate that those we have internet service for our Navajo people at chapter, but that's for just temporary. So, Madam Chair, members of RDC, I really like to see all the stakeholders come together and come up with something that's going to really be beneficial for our Navajo people. And it's just something that I like to see. And definitely like to see broadband internet service throughout the Navajo Nation. We're all 100%, but yeah, affordable. And we're using this issue today about revenues. Navajo Nation is losing revenues. But to get that revenue to increase costs of certain services like internet and broadband, it's going to go back to the people. It's going to go back to the people. That's my biggest concern. So if we want to talk about revenue generation for Navajo people, because again, we say that the closure NGS, closure of Peabody mine, Mojave, We lost revenues. But we can find revenue somewhere else. Instead of getting revenues back from our people. So these service provider carriers can pay for the leases. The Madam Chair and I don't want to speak too long. I know that this is a big concern to me, Madam Chair. So again, I appreciate all the entities that have been working on this, but we all had to come together. Make sure that we all, for our Navajo people. And it's just something that I want to be very vocal on it. Madam Chair, thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and thank you, Madam Paul. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Simpson. Right now, I'd like to go ahead and give it to Department Manager for GLAD.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of RDC. I just want to go off of Delegate Simpson's concerns here. The regs really identify and really want to enforce the market value. So they want to have reasonable market rates, and they want to be taken into consideration in regards to the location and the size. I'm reading right off the regulations under subsection 13 on page 20, lease permit and fee. This is the TTP rental rates and fees. But everything, there's going to be a sliding scale. So there's going to be not literally, there's not going to be one set rate. There's going to be a sliding scale according to the amount of traffic these towers receive, the amount of the location, the actual footprint that it puts on the ground. These are all taken into consideration. So this fee that is set right now, yes, it is high, and we know we do receive these concerns from people, from delegates, from providers, and from carriers. But this is the whole intent of the regulation, is to provide a sliding scale to determine what cell towers get a lot of traffic and where they need maybe more services. But that's the whole intent of the regulations, to actually finally have this plan in place and these regulations to make sure that we know we're not overcharging or we're not undercharging. So that's the reason why, and we're not trying to put the cost back on the people. And we understand that we are basically kind of like, I don't want to say it, but we're kind of have like third world country living conditions, and we're trying to get out of that. And that's the whole intent of the regulations, is to help move forward and to help these carriers and providers to provide better services for all of us in the long run. And that's just the final intent of these regulations, is to have a better understanding for everyone, and to have a better way of life and a better way of communication, literally at the end of the day. So I just want to share that with you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, delegates.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie, for that. As Chair of Resources and Development Committee, I know that we want to push for these regulations, but I've read this twice. And again, Ms. Blackhat with Department of Justice, I have a big concern. The entity that should be monitoring, the entity that should be really putting the language or even proper provisions into this regulation should have been in collaboration, and Navajo Telecommunication Regulatory Commission taking the lead, and that would be Mr. Tico Charlie Shop. Now, I guess, so when I read this, it says Division of Natural Resources Authority, they're going to be the collectors. And again, I'm going to use again the analogy of the current business site leasing regulations the Navajo Nation has. The BSL regs was in collaboration with Navajo Nation Land Department, but economic development is the one that is making changes to the regulations, whether it's through the administrative plan, which is the pre-leasing activity, the management plan, which is the post-leasing activity. Division of Economic Development has Navajo Nation Real Estate Department monitoring, collecting fees, working closely with Office of the Controller. So there's a segregation of authorities there. So we talk about checks and balances, but when I come back and read these regulations, it's Navajo Nation Land Department Manager. I do have a problem with this. And again, with my colleague here, Mr. Danny Simpson, we want what is, I guess, in the best interest of our constituents across Navajo Nation. So I know that and that's the reason why, as you all as service providers, stakeholders showed up here today, because you all have a concern with this. So I know that Mr. Halona's on the line, and this is going to be what I would like to request. I'd like to request that we take these regulations back again. And I'd like Navajo Telecommunication Regulatory Commission, Mr. Tico Charlie Shot, because they pose the expertise in this area, to invite all the stakeholders that are here today. You know of all the stakeholders because you've been meeting with them. And get another meeting session to where you collectively get input, whether if it's a 1, 2, however many days, and with Navajo Nation Land Department and GLAD, their the Office and Division of Natural Resources, because it is a concern. Let me share this with you. NTUA had awarded Oak Springs chapter with a fiber optic line to be extended from Hunters Point to Oak Springs and get a tower going, the middle leg, okay? Now, the last leg of it, so with these regulations, it's $12,000. I believe, is it a year? And right now, there's only 55 customers in the community of Oak Springs that had asked for internet. And what's happening is this $12,000 now a year is going to be divided up among the 55 customers, the end users to this internet. And that's going to be a higher dollar monthly rental amount that they're going to be getting. And that's my concern, because a lot of our constituents are either, number one, on a fixed income. We have a higher percentage of our constituents that meet the poverty guidelines here on Navajo Nation. So it is hard. And again, we want to make this workable to where every stakeholder that is either here or present on the call and get their voice to be heard. You know, talk about fairness, and that's what we want. And that's what, you know, was just voiced here by my colleague here, Honorable Danny Simpson. So with that, that's going to be the recommendation at this point right now, because I am concerned. And now, you know, I got honorable colleagues here that are concerned about this. And so with that, I think we really need to go back to the drawing table. So right now, I want to let Mr. Halona know the direction we're going to go. That you ran a 5K to get here. So Mr. Halona Ado Linigi Kodoti Naxos and Hitato Ninsos. Hashing Sogo and then Hik a Kodot Resources and Development Committee members need Linigi. Nani and the Ayon Hitich. Binyadishnidi, and what I had voiced to the attendees here is when I read this, and I'm doing a comparison with the business site leasing regulations, where Division of Economic Development takes the lead for any clients that are coming on board. They, you know, work with you to get the land, and they're the ones that are doing the pre and the post leasing activities through monitoring, through compliance, controlling, and then improving the process. It says Navajo Nation Land Department Manager. The department's going to be collecting, and I thought that these regulatory towers, fiber optic, broadband, and anything related to telecommunications should be redirected to the proper program or department, where I believe that's where Mr. Tico Charlie's shop would be pretty much taking the lead in consultation with Navajo Nation Land Department and also GLAD. So and right now, I do see exhibits here where there had been some recommendations that were made by some of our service provider stakeholders. Eshehan Sodon Linigi Bazad Biketo Tado deregulation Zigi Bifoso. So that's a concern. So the recommendation I made here is that we need to go back to the drawing table, Shanat. I know that we want to get these regulations approved, but there was a timeline of information that was recapped by Mr. Dunstan here as to, the activities and that had happened over the last couple of years. In regards to where RDC's position is now. I'd like to go ahead and give it to Dave. Neil, I'm sorry, I got so many names in my head. Neil here. He had raised his hand for a question earlier. So right now the position of RDC was to take these regulations back again, because there has to be a segregation of authority somewhere. So coming from that concept, this is just seems to be prepared in a one-way direction to me. And I believe, Mr. Honorable Danny Simpson, is also looking at, the concern of input from the stakeholders of Thooshinatani. I had mentioned that I would prefer this to the proper department would be in TRC to collaborate with Land Department and GLAD and invite the stakeholders. And again, say something that would be workable. I know, again, I did mention at the last meeting in NTUA that we do have for-profit and nonprofits here that are concerned because it's a ripple effect down to our end users, which is the customers. So so like right now, I'd like to go ahead and allow you time because again, I know that you had shared your concern back at NTUA a couple of weeks ago, but since we have a lot of the stakeholders here, and I do believe we have some on the call too. So
Akusila, yeah, Chairman, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Resource Development Committee. And as we're all here today, colleagues, guests, everybody that's in the room. This is not something is new. We've been working on this since 2016. Ever since the Bureau of Indian Affairs gave the authority to the Navajo Nation to handle and approve its own leasing. In the general leasing regulations, clearly stated, it said telecom regulations. So we said, let's clean this. But prior to that, all we've been operating on was RDC legislations or guidance. And the reason why you see Land Department written in those regulations when were formulated as up to now, the Resource Development Committee has given that authority to the Land Department to handle all the telecom towers on Navajo. That's why you see that. Okay. So going back, I see Teresa sitting here.
I and Ellery Yazzie with General Land Development started working on these regulations. We went offsite, I don't know how many times, we spent a few days going through developing the regulations along with DOJ attorney Tony Flora. And so we worked on that aspects, and the question that you're asking was something we asked in the beginning. Do we separate this? Do we just do land leasing for telecom towers regulations separately? Auto NMTRC, kiddo, I just on Hashint Abba has only in hot Lahi Bikaho. That has only had a dog to stop. But at the time, it was agreed that no, let's just do one so we don't have two separate. Let's just do one, combine them. So land department says, these are our recommendations. This is what we'd like to do. This is how we like to set it up. And then TRC input was, yes, this is what we want in there. This is what needs to be put in there. This is the frequency. This is how we need to handle. This is where we have to listen to the complaint from consumers, all of that. So that's how that started. And we've had, since then, I don't know how many public hearings we've had regarding these regulations. And up to now, it's clearly is that the carriers just don't want no regulator. They don't want to be regulated, period. That's what we're dealing with. We even have challenges right now with the legislation that RDC has put in place since 2005. So we have issues. And nobody wants to talk about the issues, and we haven't. And that's what has resulted. That's why we said we need regulation. There's a whole bunch of towers there's no documents on, unauthorized. They piggyback off the right of way when when right of ways weren't allowed to be piggybacked on. They did it anyway. So maybe that's a whole separate aspect we need to cover is these are what's really out there. This is the information that I think you need to understand and see. We're not making it up. Other carriers, what they're being asked to pay on a co-location to those that have towers now. Some that don't even have authorization, but they're still co-locating and paying, they're receiving the funds. I guarantee you they are more than 2,000 that the Navajo Nation charges for co-location. We can bring all that as well. So I think you need to have a clear understanding as to what the real underlying issue is. So we said, let's do the regulations. But that includes what activities have happened. When we talk about background, going back and fixing this, coming into compliance, those are all land issues. Okay, so after Ms. Hopkins left NMTRC, Chris Vicente came in NTRC and he says, this is what we're doing, this is how far we got with these regulations. And the first thing he said, but that's one of my things I wanted to do. We needed to modernize our telecommunication aspect so we can move forward. Not only telecom towers, fiber, broadband backhaul, all of those. So, that's a whole separate aspects. The fiber is a whole different, another issue that we'll have to deal with at some time as well. Although it never done only goes to cut each state of that. Of course, yeah, that needs to be addressed. they have to bring those into compliance. For that. Of course, AA updates, man, we're in the way of everything, and then so it just wants to be whatever they want to do is what it boils down to. We can't do that on Navajo. And so when Chris Vicente came to NMTRC, we had many meetings going through the whole regulations, and then he added additional from NMTRC. But he also agreed that, let's keep it together. Let's keep the regulations together so it flows, the whole aspects of it flows together. How you get a lease, what are the requirements? And then after that, what are you required to do? That's where they pick up that side. I don't know which end. Okay, once the lease is issued, I'll put it until the next annual rent is due and the lease expires, renewal. I didn't get in on this, not okay. Okay, but all the requirements leading up to is what the land department that resource committee had given the authority to handle and do. So we worked on that, and then we got to a point where we knew we needed more information as to what's really going on outside. And all that was not. What about the major carriers that want to come in? I don't know, powers. So that aspect. So we said, okay, we need to reach outside and find expert professional. That's all they do is powers with counties, with states, with cities, with government that know regulations of telecom, the industry, the marketplace, what they're doing. So that's how we started working with Vertical Bridge. They're world renowned as to what they do. I think their credentials speak for themselves. And we said, this is how far we got. What's really going on out there? We want to get prepared for the future too. What's happening? What's coming up? They deal with it. They've got thousands of towers that they manage and that they take care of. So they provided input and said, this could be done here. This could be done. This wouldn't work in the industry. Now there's stuff that we took out and stuff. So we wanted regulations that were business friendly, that were industry friendly, that were not asking anything different than anywhere else they're expected to do. Of course, I guess such a dry don't he got it. I said, sorry, how you want that wording to go then? Although that what gets that Nini of course only catch the nether dash this kind of alliance, no. So I mean we're here to provide a service, we understand that. But how can we do it in a respectable manner, reputable way of doing it to encourage good business so we could have other carriers here? And so from the business side, it may be competition, but competition is good for you. So how are they able to move in? How do we make things faster, easier, quicker for them? That's why they're really not here, is that they don't understand what you do on Navajo. They understand what you do in the state somewhere. It's easy. It's all written out. There you go. And you fill out that form and it's done. But here, you got to do this. You got to do that. So that streamlining process is also a part of how do we make that faster, quicker, and be able to handle it. Out of the accountability side, OOC, they've been involved in our meetings and discussions as well. What do you need? How do you want it so you can do these accounts for each carrier on Navajo? What do you need? And they said, well, first of all, we need documents to support that. Sure, then acquire that. So those kind of things need to be cleared up as well. But for part of the regulations, that's how far we've gotten. And then NMTRC had their legal counsel working with our consultants and us saying, okay, I think we've got it ready now, we're done. And then wanted another public hearing, we went through that one. And then we went through another one. And now we're kind of like going back and starting over again. A call quaggy. So we understand, some of the confusion you might be having is like, you know, I did this way, but if you understand how it was developed and all the history up to this point, is okay. Of course, I'm not so good. We could do that too. We could pull it apart, and I said that, so, you know, because in NTRC, after Chris Vicente left, we've been waiting now for what, 2 years? Waiting for the same regulations. Okay, and then it's like, well, we don't like this now, go back. Just change the word over here, now it's okay. But now we're still there, 2 years now. Alcohol. And the reason we're waiting is because they're together. So we need RDC to approve the regulation that addresses all the land issues, everything under DNR's oversight. Then that same legislation keeps moving, and which the NNTRC Commission had already passed those regulations. That then goes to their oversight, which is now the and when that's done, now you have an approved regulation for telecom all across the board, every aspect of it. So that's the goal. That's how we were doing it. But the recommendation is to split them. We could split them. And we have all the land, the leasing, the processes, the rates, all of that the Division of Natural Resource departments are all a part of, and the regulatory aspects of it. You know, we could do that, and then NTRC could handle there on this side as to what they want to monitor. The permitting aspects, the equipment aspects, the frequency aspects, whatever, what have you, the heights and all those requirements. But I still think maybe in another session we can provide you all the other information that I mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Holona. Neil,
Madam Chair, real quick.
Honorable Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members RDC, Mr. Holona, Good Nelson today. RDC does not oppose this regulation. Certain parts, they need to be tweaked. And it goes back to, let's go to page 20, lease permit and TTP rental and fees. Notwithstanding the general lease regulation, section 2334, the Department of NLD is authorized to determine the reasonable market rental rates and fees. That's a lot of authority. I have a problem with this individual HUA. I'm gonna say, the rate's gonna be high. Those are the things I have concern on. Authorities given to certain entities, one entity. I don't care for secret wind communication. I want to jack up their prices or their rate or those type of things. There has to be some check and balance in place. This is right here, what I just read, it's not check and balance. One person has a lot of authority. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. I think regulation that needs to be put in place, yes, we do support it. But certainty has to be tweaked in these regulations. So that I think, yes, regulation is being placed, but certainty has to be tweaked. So I looked at your consulting, bringing, have all the expertise. but we're very unique as Navajo Nation. And sometimes we're compared to, this can work for the state, this can work for the county, this can work for the cities, towns, everything, yes, what they come up with. But when they come up to Navajo Nation, they try to utilize those same strategy to the outside game, doesn't work. But my biggest concern is, let's not deter, try to work something out in these regulations that need to be tweaked. Of all the individuals will have, you know, you said, this, we're speaking for our Navajo people, our constituents. And let's all sit back together, the stakeholders, and where the problems are at, work them out. I think there's probably only 5 or 10% that needs to be tweaked through here. And we don't want to deter these companies or carriers to get away from Navajo Nation providing these services. Internet. What's going to happen to our business? We just talked about that 2 days ago. We can't bring big business to our Navajo Nation because of our laws. And that's what's happening today. Yes, we have small stores here and there, but I think we can, like Madam Tall here, her district, Chinle. We can't even bring Walmart in. And I hope it does not happen here, that these providers start walking off, because this is going to have an impact on how they have their towers up on the nation, the rental rates and other issues. So, Mr. Holland, I support this, but there's still certain things that need to be tweaked. So, Madam Chair, just as you stated, have the group sit back down, not just the land department, not just the telecommunication regulatory office or TRC, but everyone that can have their voice, their comments, and put it into this regulation here. If that's done, I think we can work something out for our people where they can have an affordable internet service to their homes or broadband to their homes. Again, I'm going to speak for the Navajo people.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Simpson. And again, today, we do have Cell One. We do have an alliance of Navajo Broadband. We have Navajo Nation Shopping Center. We have CTIA Choice, Sacred Wind, NTRC and NTUA. And then we also, of course, have Vertical Bridge Consultant to the Navajo Nation, all here today. And, you know, this does still pose a concern, you know, coming from a management perspective. Again, oftentimes we talk about accountability. Oftentimes we talk about internal control. You know, we really need to step back and incorporate that into these regulations. I get it that I don't know if it's the 24th or the 23rd Council Resources Development Committee gave that authority to Navajo Nation Land Department. But I really think that the entity that should be properly, and I'm not saying to separate the regulations, Shanatani, no. What we need to do is come up with one as to who is going to be really taking the lead. Right now, it's all about NLD, in DNR, and very minimal to NTRC. So with that, we need to separate that authority mechanism. So, and the Resources Committee for 25th Navajo Nation Council is requesting that to be redone. So so with that, I want to again, and I don't know if you want to jump in, Honorable Claude, but request that I'd like in TRC, now that Mr. Tico Charlie is the executive director, along with land department, Division of Natural Resources and GLAD to come together, but extend invitation to these very stakeholders that are here today. And and we as RDC, you know, can be at the meeting to listen to the dialogue that's going to happen. You know, if it's a really good session for 2 days, I believe that every stakeholder, and then you can't get everything that you want. No, there has to be a give and take. That's what we need to understand. And just like you heard Mr. Halona, and I totally get his position too. You know, in the past years, Navajo Nation has been taken advantage of. To this day, I would, when I used to run projects, I call NTUA, is there any infrastructure lines? Even NTUA themselves did not know that some of these contractors ran lines without getting the proper clearance from NTUA. You know, this is what, yes, in reality is happening out there. Right of way is very important because you all know that in Big Navajo, we're dealing with trust land and we still have to answer the Department of Interior. You got NEPA laws through Environmental Protection Agency. And the only thing that we want to do and reiterate to a lot of any business that comes here to Navajo is that we want you to go about obtaining your business, the services that you're going to provide to our constituents the right way, instead of circumventing certain steps of the laws that the Navajo Nation currently has. And yes, we really need these telecommunication regulations. And so that's what at this point I'd like to request. I don't know, Honorable Claude, you would like to add anything?
Yes, and good morning to everyone. I was trying to introduce myself, but it was not going through. But my name is Shauna Claw. I'm the council delegate for Chinle. For coming in and being here today and for sharing your concerns. And I am in agreement with what both sides, with the carriers and then also people who provide services. But then at the same time, you know, being a member of the Navajo Nation Council, we're faced with the hard decisions of what's in the best interest for the whole entire Navajo Nation. And for me, sometimes that includes making the decision of having people actually pay into the Navajo Nation. And so I do see that point, but I do, you know, have a question in regards to the Navajo Nation. We're talking about these fees. We're talking about the regulations now, but I would also like to bring in the accounts receivable department to see how this is going to fit in. Because if we're talking about a separation and then also thinking about where is the money going to go to, then maybe that would help us determine what decision needs to be made. And then also, you know, being a customer of a lot of the providers here, I don't see very much benefits going back to our Navajo people. I know during COVID, there was a small offset of pricing for like internet. But I know like the handheld devices are the outrageous price. And, you know, that does go back to the customers. And yet, you know, when a grandma or grandpa, they want to get a new phone, you know, there's no thoughts, there's no second thoughts for them paying that. They're paying like $300 to even a little cheap one is still over $100. And so I think that, you know, if I see the full picture from what each company has paid in as far as like your taxes. And then also just like maybe your business regulatory fees. I still think that there's still room for companies to grow. And so I think that these regulations are needed. But maybe as the delegates have said, that there needs to be you know, an analysis of what is actually a good point. Maybe this is too high right now as a starting point, and we may have to decrease it. Those are some of the things that we want to see. And I know that the 23rd and 24th council, they did work very closely with the land department. And I feel like the reason for that is because you know, listening to Mr. Halona here, he does have the knowledge and the history of our Navajo Nation land. But at the same time, we still need to build up our telecommunications regulatory department. And how do we do that? Well, we give them more responsibility. And the goal is to get to the level of, you know, under the United States, there's federal regulations. We don't have a say so. Like if you guys were off the res, you wouldn't even be sitting at a table. The decision would be made for you. So those are some of the decisions, you know, that Navajo Nation are very thankful because the sovereignty is inherent in there. Otherwise, like I said, you wouldn't be sitting at a table. The decision would have already been made. But I think that with this new RDC group, I do see everyone here, you know, trying to be inclusive of everyone's views and your concerns. And we do have our booklets here, and we appreciate your comments and your concerns. And for those providers that are out there, I really appreciate the services that you're providing to our constituents. But those are some of the concerns that I have too, is we hear with RDC about businesses that have come in and then they abandon their sites. They don't clean up. They don't take any, you know, responsibility for that part. Or then we've never done a study on like these towers that are near people's homes. We hear about radioactive waves and microwaves. And so I know some people, some of my friends and colleagues who are very sensitive to that. And so our times are changing. And so, you know, we don't know what some of those repercussions are if a tower is nearby somebody's home. And so the responsibility does need to be there, not just for the health of our environment, but for our people. And so, you know, paying a fee can also branch out to some of our social programs. And so that's what those are some of the things I think about when making a decision. So I just wanted to add that in. But my request, Madam Chair, is to have the accounting department maybe do a presentation as well to us on how they plan or how they see this regulation working for the Navajo Nation. And then I don't know if there was any discussion on how those fees would be broken up. But again, for me, I would like to see the whole picture before moving on with our regulations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Claw.
Madam Chair,
could you please
Madam Chair.
can you please identify yourself, sir?
Yes, Alex Montoya, Chairman of the NNTRC. I just want to let the RDC know and those that are listening in that we are amenable to your request that we get back together and have a sit down with all entities that are involved, my commissioners together and our director, and we'll go ahead and set a date or a timeline to address the issues that are being presented today at this meeting. Honorable Chair, I appreciate the time. Again, Alex Montoya, Chair of the NNTRC.
Mr. Montoya, for your recommendation. Right now, I'd like to give it to my colleague, Mr. Tahi.
Madam Chair, members of RDC, just to put this on your radar, concerning the fact that you're wanting, Telecommunication Regulatory Commission, Division of Natural Resources, Land Department, and General Land Development Department to go back and revisit the regs. There is already a couple of your colleagues who are ready to submit paperwork for some of these towers and to have the fees waived. So delaying these regs further is going to cause trouble when we start addressing those legislations that are going to come before RDC for final authority. I would just caution that you try to put a timeline in place so that way we don't table these legislations for a long period of time until these regs are finally passed by RDC. That you look at trying to map out a timeline for these entities. So this way it won't impact those legislations that will be coming to RDC.
Yeah,
Well, that one can come up next week, right?
thank you. Thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Otto, I'd like to take it to Commissioner for NTRC, Miss Claw, sorry. Otto, you have the floor, wow.
Very much. And, if I could be frank, I think the bottom line with these telco regulations is the fact that we've been working on them for over 10 years now. And in November 4th and 5th of 2021, we had the open forum for public comments with the 24th Navajo Nation Council, RDC, present at that meeting as well. And the bottom line is that everyone has submitted their public comments. We had public comments open for 45 days. It was the third time that we've done that. We are now to the end where there were just little wording issues that needed to be corrected with the Department of Justice attorney Latanya Johnson. She's the one who was working in concert with Jim Dunstan as well as Vertical Bridge to come to a concession on the final submission of the tower siting rule regulations. To my understanding that was worked out about a month ago. And so I'm not sure which tower siting regulations they've given you, but Latanya Johnson is the one who has the latest version of the tower siting regulation. And she should be able to answer more questions about that. But in terms of the siting regulations, what it boils down to is that it's about money. It's about money. People, the telcos that owe back rent, it's about the amount of money that's being paid. And that's very sensitive, you know, when we were trying to create income for the Navajo Nation. As commissioners on NNTRC, we're trying to create competition so that we can bring price down. But we can't. There isn't any way for us, you know, for example, in our plan of operations, we're not allowed to regulate any Navajo Nation enterprises, which means we cannot regulate NTUA. That is spelled out in our plan of regulations. So we can regulate everybody else except NTUA. We're trying to work with everyone, and the siting regulations, like Council Delegate Claw mentioned, the FCC has their regulations that everyone follows, correct? And we don't have the authority to, they don't have a democracy where everybody can come in and make a comment and do things like that. Whatever they say is the rule and the law. Here on the Navajo Nation, we've been trying to create this democracy and give everyone a chance to submit their written comments, to give us verbal comments. And everyone, all the telcos, over 100 people showed up at the meeting at Twin Arrows in November of 2021. Everyone submitted their handwritten comments. Everyone submitted their verbal comments. And we all incorporated as much as we could into the tower siding regulation. What ended up happening is that what we're having an issue with now is that no one has given the authority for someone to be the sheriff in this situation. So there's no regulatory authority, so someone can say, I'm sorry, you guys need to share. How come you guys don't want to share? We need to figure this out. That's not the authority that an NTRC has. What we're trying to do is change that, but we need to work in concert with the Navajo Land Department since they issued the lease, so that we can try and bring this to a closure and we can implement. And I think the ideal that Councilor Delegate Law had with bringing in the accounting, who had paid their back rent fee. The fees now are $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year. Now, if we can create competition, then we would be able to bring down the price for the consumer. Unfortunately, that's something that we can't do when you have conglomerates that have different ways of protecting themselves and preventing them from paying those amounts. And we need to figure out a way, just like you said, we come to conclusion, get the tower siding rule approved. It's not gonna help everybody. And we know we're gonna still have a lot of issues with it. But the bottom line is we need to come to closure with this and get to a point where we can start regulating it. Because right now, everyone is in limbo. It's status quo right now. And we need to figure out a way for the land department and NTRC, DOJ, everybody to come to a consensus that the regulations are where they need to be. If we were on the FTC side and the comments that were submitted, they're considered, small comment, and they just allow them to continue on with their statutory rules, right? With us, they want us to go back to NNTRC and approve the new tower siding rules. But the FCC, when you have slight changes, they automatically incorporate them. And there's no reason for them to go back to the commissioners to get approval again. And I think that's one of the issues that is currently happening. And if we go back and we can sit with the Navajo Land Department, DOJ, and NTRC, I think we can all come to consensus and carry out what you guys are trying to get us to do. But unfortunately, someone needs to tell us, whoever us is within the Navajo Nation, who the sheriff's going to be. And who are they going to listen to, and who's going to be the one that's going to be able to enforce the rules. And once that has happened, then, that's what's going to create even more chaos, because a lot of these eligible telecommunication companies, the ETCs, they're not going to want to pay it, and they're not going to want to share. We can't make people share. And that's the hard part of this, is that creating the competition has been very difficult. We've talked to T-Mobile, we've talked to AT&T, we've talked to Verizon. They're willing to come on to the Navajo Nation, but we don't have any regulations that would help them come on to the Navajo Nation. So we talk about big businesses, Walmart, Amazon warehouses, Home Depot, Lowe's, Sam's Club, all these big places that we could have on the Navajo Nation, provided that we had better regulations in terms of economic development, in terms of telecommunications, financial obligations, and then go from there. But I agree that we will go back to the board, and we will sit down with the land department as well as NNTRC and DOJ, and everyone will come together and we will come out with a final tower siding rules for everyone. And like I said, everyone isn't going to be happy with them, but we're going to do our best again to try and come to a consensus enclosure to this so that we can get these enacted and given to Navi and then given to council so that we can start enacting these regulations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Claw, for clarity and the historical work that has gone into these regulations. Otto, right now, so this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm only going to allow 5 minutes to the entities that we've had identified earlier. And I don't want, to be harsh. I want us just one representative from the entity just to state, because it appears now that there has been enough public input, meaning comment periods that was allowed by the stakeholders. And then, just hearing, from Mr. Halona and going back, years, and then also here to the commissioner with NTRC. I really think that, again, we need to understand the position of the Navajo Nation. Again, just hearing, and it's just not in this area, but it's just overall, natural resources where, we really need to take, the Navajo Nation needs to take position in everything. We can't just have, companies or businesses just run over Navajo Nation anymore. We're in the 21st century. So right now, NTUA, I'd like to go to you and please just state, within the 5 minutes that's going to be allotted as to what is really your concern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Neil Rawls, NQA. My concern is a lot of misinformation is passed around. In the last RDC work session, it was stated that these carriers want these regulations. They want to know the rules, and I agree, they want to know the rules. Now, in this work session, it's stated these carriers don't want the rules. They want it to be the wild, wild west. And so you hear two different things. My biggest concern, or NQA's biggest concern about these regulations and the leases, as you read them, you can tell the objective here is to generate revenue. NQA believes the primary objective should be to get internet to all of the Navajo people. And how do we do that? There's a reason that major carriers are not widespread on Navajo. That's because there's no infrastructure in the small populated, unserved and underserved areas. These major carriers are not going to come to Navajo and build infrastructure. That's what NQA does. That's why NQA, it was stated that NQA isn't under the jurisdiction of NTRC. That's because NQA is not a carrier. We are not a carrier. We are a Navajo-owned utility company that builds infrastructure owned by the Navajo people to enable carriers to deliver services to the people. And until NQA extends the network into these low populated, unserved and underserved areas, those carriers are not going to serve there. Look at the AT&T FirstNet network. It was stated in the last work session that there were concerns AT&T FirstNet does not cover the whole Navajo Nation. The reason is because in the low populated, unserved, underserved remaining areas, there's no infrastructures. Carriers have to have affordable towers to co-locate on. They have to have affordable backhaul, which is the connection from that tower to off the Navajo Nation. And that's what NQA provides via fiber optic cable. We build towers, or we used to build towers, until these fees were imposed on NQA. As soon as those fees were imposed on NQA, what happened? 2 years, we haven't built a tower where we were building 4 to 8 towers a year. So we've lost opportunity on 8 to 16 structures that major carriers could have co-located on. And we've got the same situation now with right of way that's going to towers, which enables the carriers to get the traffic off the nation, to the internet, to their switching centers in Phoenix, Albuquerque, Denver. And now we have fiber optic right of ways that are being held up because DNR wants to impose fees on N2A for the right of way. And yet they don't tell us what those fees are, which the fees are going to be too much for N2A to pay anyway, because that's why you don't have infrastructure in the low populated, unserved and underserved areas. N2A believes that internet provides opportunity for economic development. If you need revenue, enable the Navajo people to develop that economic opportunity. Education is one way, but businesses developed out of the home, if you're not going to build businesses on Navajo, then enable the Navajo people to build businesses in their home. And to do that, they have to have internet access. And the only way they're going to get internet access is if you let the Navajo-owned utility company build infrastructure that will attract carriers and provide those carriers with affordable co-location and affordable backhaul to all of the nation. I thank you very much for allowing me this time.
Yeah. Thank you, N2A, for sharing that information. Next, I'd like to go to Choice. Please state your name again.
Yes, my name is Lena Silsky. I'm the general manager of Choice Wireless. Earlier, I was there senior. So, the team regional, but you and I'm gonna go through this quickly. Just highlight high level Choice N2A Wireless. It is a joint venture company owned by two companies, 49% by ComNet and NT, okay, and 51% by NTUA with the Navajo Nation Enterprise. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we have over 100 fixed wireless brand equipment on towers. Okay, and those towers are owned by NTUA, SBI, Sacred Wind, and we have other carriers on the nation that we work with. We don't want, we also use their infrastructure for their services for internet and mobile services. Okay. Our coverage map today covers over 30,000 households. Again, we mentioned EBS, ERS technology. The EBS technology is leased by the Navajo Nation today in 2 states in Utah and Arizona. I also want to mention that there is a free program called the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. 50% of our customer base rely on that today. Customers are getting free internet services through this program today. And there was a mention by Delegate that these programs are likely going to go away at some point. And if they should, these programs are going to go away. These dollars will possibly be back on customers. That's a $75 subsidy program that are being offered today under the ACP program. I also want to mention mobile services. We are in ETC status. We deliver mobile services to our customers. Both Lifeline, again, a subsidy program, up to $35 per customer. And then we have prepaid services. Now we're in the midst of transitioning our business. We've talked about other carriers like AT&T and Verizon. We're working, and we've worked with them in the last few years to bring the combination through FirstNet and through other programs with Verizon. So this is their native network. Using NTUA infrastructure and working with NTUW to deliver these services for our customers. So they're no longer roaming on Nation. Customers who are on Nation are no longer paying for these services or these services. So we're working through that process because that's what the 24th Navigation Council have requested of NTUA Wireless to bring these carriers for competition with the nation. And that's what we're working towards today.
Now, the question about the definition, telecommunications regulations. So two areas that will impact UA the most is the $1,000 per month fee, as well as the 20% gross revenue tax. Now, if that is implemented, several things will happen, and NTUA is going to have, NTUAW is going to have to reassess this, okay? And I want to do this respectfully. And I don't want to come across as though I'm intimidating anybody or, threatening anybody. This is the honesty behind this. This is the reality. If these were to be implemented, sites that are already funded through NTIA or CARES-P funded will likely not be built by NTUA. And these sites, we're going to have to reassess. Are we going to move forward with building them? They're already funded, there's already money available for them. We may have to reassess that and go back. Secondly, we may also have to reassess our current sites. I mentioned over 100 sites that we have our technology on. We'll have to reassess those. 2/3 of our towers or locations are already unprofitable. You mentioned Oak Springs. That's one of the sites that's already funded. Money is there, right away is completed. Tower equipment ready to go up. It's only 55 people living there. 2/3 of our sites, communities are in that situation. We would have to be forced to reassess those. Assuming that these fees will be passed, these fees will be assessed to NTUA, Sacred Wind, and SBI. We assume as the last mile carrier, these fees will be passed on to NTUA. We in turn will likely pass that cost on to the customer. Now, you're looking at an additional $20 to $50 increase in the customer's monthly bill, depending on which site they're on. And if you're looking at Oak Springs site, you're looking at $50 increase because you don't have 55 customers, you have money somewhere. And then now you're looking at other communities for dance, the city, Chile, you're looking at those things. Lastly, we're not against regulations. In fact, we welcome them. All we're asking is that we be part of the conversation. That we can have, we're also looking out for our customers, our listeners. And that's every GM, CEO's responsibility is to look out for the customer and feel that business. Thank you for that time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Sosi. Next, I'd like to go ahead and take it to Sacred Wind.
Teresa Hopkins with Sacred Winds. Sacred Winds right now, as I mentioned earlier, we're a middle mile and last mile provider. We currently have over 537 miles of fiber throughout Eastern America. We currently also, I need to correct the number of towers. We actually have about 50 towers, not 25. One of the major projects that's going to be impacted by the regulations is the current 2.5 gigahertz spectrum that is now owned. The Navajo Nation owns its own spectrum. It's called 2.5 gigahertz. It was applied for. The Federal Communication Commission a couple of years ago provided opportunity for all tribes in the U.S. to apply for that spectrum. Navajo was one of those. Now what happens, the Navajo Nation sent out a bid and said, okay, who's going to help the Navajo Nation build out that spectrum? And the entities that won that proposal, that RFP, is Sacred Winds on the New Mexico side and NTUAW and NTUA on the Arizona side. Where this has an impact is that 2.5 gigahertz spectrum is not for voice services, it's for broadband internet services. And what that spectrum will do will allow connectivity to areas on Navajo where we're not able to get hardwired cable to homes like fiber optics or even copper. The issue with this though is that because of the way the technology works with the spectrum, we're going to have to co-locate with existing towers. And if the leases come, if this lease, the regulations should get approved and the leases are gonna be charged at their recommended fee right now, $12,000 per year. The same things as has been noted by NTUA and NTUAW. We're gonna have to go back and determine whether we want to pursue this project. And the project we will just give back to Navajo and say is unrealistic. The problem with that though, is Navajo Nation only has one opportunity within a certain period of time to build out that 2.5 gigahertz spectrum. And it has to be completed 100%. If it's not completed 100%, that spectrum goes back to the Federal Communications Commission, and they can now resell that and rebid that out to other carriers. And more than likely, because of the terrain on Navajo, because of the size of Navajo, more than likely, no one is gonna want to bid on that. And now Navajo Nation has lost that spectrum that they fought so hard for, and what a lot of tribes have advocated for, of having spectrum ownership over their tribal lands. That's one thing. The other thing that is gonna impact is the current ARPA projects. I know for a fact that Wahalan and Chichakachaka both have land use plans approved where they have telecommunication towers approved within their compound. What the regulations say is that although the land use plan has been approved for those two chapters for a telecommunication tower, the regulation says that they now gonna have to relinquish that piece of property that the tower is gonna go on. That's one of the issues that we see in the regulations. It's also been stated that service providers do not want to be regulated. We are regulated right now by the Federal Communication Commission. Depending on what state you're in, we're regulated by either the New Mexico Public Regulatory Commission, the Arizona Corporation Commission, or the Utah. So we are regulated right now, and the telecom industry is a highly regulated entity. We're required, if we're receiving federal monies, we're required to report monthly, quarterly, yearly. So we are regulated and we do a lot of it. The other thing, again, as I stated, is Sacred Winds, we currently have over $30 million worth of projects that are already funded to extend services out. Although we're not necessarily a telecom wireless provider, we do provide fiber that runs to those towers to provide connectivity to the outside. The other thing that's missing and misunderstood is that the carriers in here are regional. We only provide services on Navajo Nation, but we still have to interconnect off of the Navajo Nation with other entities to get the Navajo Nation population connected to outside the world behind the Navajo Nation, beyond the Navajo Nation rather. And you forget that we also have to pay fees on the outside beyond Navajo to extend out. That's also another factor that's not considered. When the assumption is that because we're a wireless carrier providing cell services, that there's a bunch of money's coming in, it isn't true. Because the services that are provided on Navajo are regional and specific only to Navajo. Cell One doesn't collect any fees outside of our service territory. Sacred Winds, we don't collect any fees outside of our service territory. So those are some misconceptions that is not addressed in the regulations. And again, thank you for your time.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Hopkins, for your view from Sacred Wind. The next one I have Navajo Nation Shopping Center, Inc.
Hey, good morning, all. Nicholas Taylor, by Nick, the Chief Executive Officer of the Navajo Nation Shopping Centers. Thank you to RDC members for listening to us and hearing our side. We really appreciate that. Yeah, it's not all. And for shopping centers, we are in similar situations with these companies that do hold lands and leases, facilities, and we appreciate the opportunity to revisit these regulations. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Next would be CTIA. Matt? Is it
Yes.
Matt? Okay, you do have 5 minutes, Matt.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, honorable members of the RDC. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. My name is Matt DeTora. I'm the counsel for external and state affairs at CTIA. We represent the wireless industry. We represent wireless carriers nationwide. And I've heard a lot so far secondhand about what AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile say about these regulations. And I think a few things need clarifying here. And I'm going to try to do it in 5 minutes without stepping on what I thought were excellent points by Sacred Wind and NTUA. We filed comments on these rules in 2021, and we noted how critical a time it was for broadband deployment on the nation. And in the 2 years since, the playing field has only widened, I think. And the two major things that I'd point to, one is the deployment of fixed wireless, which the representative from Sacred Wind spoke about, and the ability to provide broadband at 120 speeds, 100 over 20 speeds in rural areas, in difficult to reach areas via 5G networks and build out. And the other, of course, is the massive amount of infrastructure money that's coming in, both in BEAD and tribal development grants from the federal government. But to be able to reap those benefits on the nation, carriers need to be able to deploy their infrastructure efficiently and cost effectively. Now, what I've heard a few times here is that the consultants for the nation have characterized the nationwide carriers as saying that the industry supports these regulations because they'll provide certainty. I can tell you, based on my discussions with our members, that's not the case. It's true that if all other things are equal, regulatory certainty is certainly better than regulatory uncertainty, but I think that's getting beside the point here. I think the issue at hand is that as they're written, these regulations are going to make it significantly more difficult and expensive for carriers to site on the nation, and it's going to drive away broadband investment at a time when the nation can least afford it. In particular, I'd note, it's going to add cost, yes, but also layers of bureaucracy to siting without the protections that the FCC has provided in other areas. And a few particular areas I'd highlight are one, and I think there was some confusion about this before that I heard, cost-based fees for siting versus market-based fees for siting, i.e. charging people what it costs to make sure that on a site, the nation gets and recoups all the costs for that site, as opposed to charging a market-based fee for that site. I'd also point to things that the FCC has established over the course of the past 10, 20 years, such as shot clocks for applications and review, ensuring carriers that if they put in an application, it will be acted on in a deadline. They'll be able to build out, that they'll be able to go through the process in a reasonable amount of time and be able to build and get the service out to their customers. Attachers have those protections off of the nation. In Arizona, in New Mexico, in Utah, surrounding the nation, they have those protections. And while we sink as an industry billions of dollars into network infrastructure yearly, the money's not limitless. It needs to go where it's best spent, and it doesn't make business sense to site someplace where the investment is being actively discouraged. And again, I want to clarify, because I think there are misconceptions here about regulations and not regulations. This isn't about the procedure here. We've been an active participant over the course of the past 3 years in comments. We respectively, we respect the sovereignty of the nation. We respect the procedure here. The nation and the FCC have different procedures, and that's fine. But the problem is that our substantive arguments are being rejected, and we're not seeing why. Like I said, we've submitted comments over the course of the past 3 years, and I think what you're seeing, and the reason you've seen so many people line up to speak against these regulations today, is that these comments aren't being addressed. And with all due respect, it's when I see a presentation at the start of this, from a for-profit entity that says, well, some of these comments are helpful and some of these comments are not helpful, it would be helpful for us to explain why. Why can't there be at least some form of shot clocks and timelines that take into account the nation's need to be able to look at these, to have sovereignty, to review these applications and come up with a reasonable time that works for the nation? Why does it have to be cost-based fees rather than market-based fees? I'm in the rare position here. I mentioned before, I don't know about our inventory on the nation. I've asked for members to try to get back to me on that one. I know they're looking into it. And I know, as you mentioned before, it's not very large, but I can tell you for that reason, our concerns here, and the reason I'm coming to you to speak today, it's not about dodging back rents or regulatory fees or not paying taxes. I think certainly these regulations, if passed, are going to have an impact on some of our members who already cite because their leases aren't being grandfathered in and would suddenly be rescinded. But, for our biggest members, the ones I keep hearing about, I'm not here because, they're really concerned that these regulations are going to hurt their bottom line. I'm here because competition in the wireless marketplace is fierce. And there are people that need to be served out on the nation, and there are opportunities there. And I think we've seen that with companies like Smith Bagley serving the nation. I think we've seen that with Fierce. I think we've seen that with Sacred Wind and other companies. There is a lot of infrastructure money being made available to bridge the business case to serve out on the nation. But what we really want to encourage is for the nation to work with us. And again, let us know what the issues are with their comments. And I'd certainly be happy to provide a copy of the comments that we filed and notes from our participation in the workshops to the NLD. I know the NNTRC has them, but please, reach out to us. My email address is mdatora@ctia.org. I'd be happy to provide those. But when we submit those and then we get finalized regulations that look a lot like the ones that we submitted substantively and commented on in 2021 and don't hear why those points were rejected, it's tough for us to turn around to our members and say, well, okay, these are the regulations there. Now you have certainty. What it's going to do, I can tell you, is disincentivize folks from coming out there and serving. So we agree with the thought to take a step back from these rules for the RDC and really consider, as the NTUA said, not to treat siting as a revenue base, because if you don't attract new sites there, there's not going to be any revenue. It's a lose-lose proposition, I think. It's how do we incentivize deployment, and the revenue will follow. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Datora.
Datora. I appreciate your feedback. Next, I'd like to go ahead and take it to Alliance of Navajo Broadband. Please state your name again, Ashona.
My name is Joy Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Navajo Broadband. I wanted to we support a lot of the topics that have been brought up today. The recategorizing of the land uses for telecom, that is going to be very difficult and to perform. And leaseholders will have to withdraw parts of their land in order to recategorize them. We also support the notion about using previously developed sites, co-location. That is a smart and economical way to deploy additional sites and tenants. What may not have been really mentioned is the reduction of the local control. Land use has been designated for different purposes, and fees that are being collected by local land use owners are used locally. And we have some chapters that are developing their own systems, their own networks. And so I believe that they really fully intended for those revenues to stay on in their areas, in their chapters. But now, with the tower fees, one example is the Bilcon project that was funded by NTIA. They are building 42 towers. They will be sending a lot of their revenues to the land department and like Delegate Fox said, where are those plans designated for? Well, it goes back to the general. The thing is that the Bilcon chapter will lose the control of that revenue. And where they expected to use a lot of that revenue to operate their system. It really inhibits economic development and economic growth for chapters. The other area is the autonomous authority. There's no administrative appeal process. Everything is in the hands of the Navajo Land Department. And there needs to be an expansion of that administrative appeal process to keep those negotiations in at a lower level instead of sending them over to the Navajo federal courts, which they could be tied up. Their matters could be tied up for months or years. So that's one thing that maybe was not mentioned. And of course, I just want to reiterate the increase in the power. Standard market rates is not a good standard. The FCC said in 2009 that small cell orders laid out a strong policy with rationale against using excessive fees for site. It discourages development by carriers at a time when they should be incentivized. Broadband and internet service shouldn't be treated as part of infrastructure, like any utility. And I think that going forward, that operating costs is going to rise, and so that cost is going to come pass along to consumers, to the Navajo people, and eventually these public programs like ACP will go away, and the Navajo people will be expected to pay the full price for their services. So our recommendation is to revisit this and stop this legislative process, take a closer examination of these regulations. We want to put the Navajo people first. Allow local control of revenue uses for tower state. Allow revenues to stay local. Allow use of existing structures and right of way for siting. Develop an administrative appeal process and include tower siting rulemaking with the responsibilities of the NTRC along with rulemaking. Develop a rulemaking process allowing stakeholders and the public to understand changes and comment and be able to comment on the impacts of their local areas and on themselves.
Okay.
So I just want the final thought, keep the Navajo people in mind.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Thompson, for your comments. Last, I'd like to go to cell 1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last but not least, first of all, just let me say it's great to see you all here in person. It's been a long pandemic, I can say, for myself. And so these types of meetings are very stimulating to me. It's good to be in a room. And I think some of the things that are coming out are perhaps coming out because people are in the room together. First of all, I want to say that as a mobile and broadband provider, SBI does many of the same things that wireless things. We are friendly competitors. We try to steal their customers. They try to steal our customers. That's the way it works in the industry. But we do work together and we do collaborate together. And I think the group that Joy represents, Alliance for Navajo Broadband, we're both members of that. And that's you know, a good example of collaboration that goes on in the industry. We've also tried to pull in what we call stakeholders on the Navajo Nation. And we think, you know, Second One SBI, excuse me, has been around now for the Navajo Nation for 27 years. So we've been out there, we built a lot of towers, and we worked with a lot of communities, a lot of chapters. we think the stakeholders, whether it's the colleges, schools, et cetera, are an immense resource in broadband. And we've worked with them for years and we intend to do that in the future. That's one of the major issues that we want to bring up and engage on if there's a broader discussion on the regs. I just want to clear up something here. As we were looking at the presentation and Mr. Dunstan was going through the timeline, I was looking at that and it just didn't make sense to me. And here's why. And I remember in April, May of 2021, certainly a draft of proposed regulations went out for formal comment. And in fact, we received 2 copies, I think one in March and maybe one in May by the TRC director at that time. Cellular One, FBI, amongst others, did file formal comments in June of 2021. After that time period, I'm going back to the timeline here. In November of 2021, there was this public hearing. And then after that, of course, you heard in early 2022, the TRC acted on the draft and passed those on to Legislative Council. The thing I want to point out is since the initial draft that we commented on in May of 2021 until about 45 days ago, SBI saw no revised document. We saw nothing. And I can say that with certainty because I was the one requesting repeatedly over the last 2 years from TRC office, former director, from certainly from DNR. And the copy that we received 45 days ago came to us from NQA. NQA, and we're very appreciative they passed it on to us. But NQA is not the tribal government. And so that presents, that creates some concern. And the binder you have in front of you, I actually delivered that. And it has the original formal comments, including the ones that Matt Ventura was making some statements about in the national carriers. And we thought it important that you all as delegates see what the formal record was, what was submitted. Now, our concern, I can tell you, as SBI, and I think I can speak for the other carriers here, is a lot of those comments were not addressed. And a lot of these comments, if you read into them, they're filed by national and regional carriers, their attorneys, their legal counsel, who signed off on them. So a lot of professionals. And as one of the statements this morning, I heard that, there's been one entity that's known a lot about the regulations and what's been done and what's been advised. That's one outside party, that's the consultant Vertical Bridge. They are very competent. That's one party, but a lot of very competent parties have made comments that have really not been drafted or in the record. And that's a great concern. So here we are today talking about this. And I will just say, Madam Chair, I think you nailed it perfectly, that it's appropriate for this discussion to go back to the TRC where there can be this overall dialogue, the dialogue that, and forgive me, but the pandemic has been a tough one for all of us. And that's a big reason why folks have not gotten together. Offices are closed, people are not traveling, but that's behind us. We can now get together in person. And, I'm not going to stand here and try to rebut or bring up things that I might have seen in the presentation I disagree with, I don't think it's false, or I think it's false. No, I think this needs to be in a broader dialogue where folks come in and we have the evidence, the data, et cetera, and then we can go at it. It's not appropriate here. So I just want to agree with the folks that came before me, a lot of their comments. I can tell you for certain, SBI is certainly not against regulations. As an ETC, we have been regulated for decades by the FCC on Lifeline, on every federal program. We're regulated by the states. We abide by all local jurisdiction development codes. In fact, before I came to the wireless industry, that's what I did. I worked for government, state and local government, writing development codes. So I have a few comments that I want to bring up in a dialogue with Vertical Bridge over these regs. But that's hopefully going to take place, and we're ready to go at it. And I didn't mean to go up on a rant there, but I just want to say that SBI is ready to come to the table and collaborate and cooperate. And we thank you again, Madam Chair, and the RDC for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Brian Gilbert. Okay,
Two first names.
yes. Okay, well, so again, I know that I'm sorry, I do apologize. Let me go ahead and give you the floor. NTU.
Yeah, my name is Jason Arvizo, the Vice President of Operations at Navajo Technical University. On the Navajo Reservation, there are in fact two higher education learning institutions, Navajo Technical University and Dene College. Both of us have telecommunication colleges associated with our institutions. In fact, NTU does have backhaul telecommunication colleges that is back to Albuquerque that benefit our campus in Hawthorne. But we have also been successful in receiving a donation, which now provides us additional towers that extend into Arizona. In a sense, we're not necessarily, we need clarification when it comes to the use of educational purpose with regard to our towers. If we maintain that status, we've been told that essentially access for our towers and the use and the acquisition of our towers, the fees are then waived. But if we were to allow co-location or other means, then allow commercial access to the towers, then those fees will then be assessed to us. So that in itself kind of hampers what we're trying to do when it comes to broadening our outreach or broadening our service area to a greater extent. The carriers have that capability of bringing connectivity to the communities across now. And we have the towers available for them to exactly do that. But yet we're hampered by the fact that if we were to do that, you know, these fees would then be applied, and that would be really detrimental to what we're trying to do. So that is one concern. And I think clarification of how the regulations handle that. Because NTU is in a position now to provide services, not just to its campuses to higher education, but to a great extent catering as well. I don't know if you're familiar with Internet too, but it's a research education network tied to higher education. We can provide that capacity and cost, but to do so, it would require us to enter into co-location agreements costs with the various carriers to bring that benefit to education. And right now, the states of Arizona and New Mexico are looking at NTU and Dene to act as educational nodes to bring services. And that then again references K-12. So that's the challenge or concern that we have for the higher education. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Arvizo. So I just want to thank all the stakeholders that are present here today and allowing a short period of time to really state your position. Again, you know, as my colleague here, Honorable Claw, had mentioned, we as leadership are put in a very complex position when it comes to regulations or policies. We do understand the magnitude of why these regulations need to be put in place. Again, as Navajo Nation being one of the bigger tribes of this 572, 74 tribes, you know, across the Navajo Nation, I mean, the United States, I think this is a really good step going forward. Again, I have a clear understanding. We have a clear understanding now that Mr. Halona did state, you know, the years that this discussion has been going on and the intent of it. So right now, again, just listening to my colleagues here, I'd like to go ahead and propose the next steps, where I would like to go ahead and have the team here to really go back and one more time address these issues, because again, there is some consistency of information sharing. With Vertical Bridge being appointed or given that opportunity by Navajo Nation, I'm assuming through a request for a proposal or qualification bid. But I want Vertical Bridge to also be there at the table to really allow, the service providers that are here and really listen to what they have to say and make changes to these regulations, because as we've heard, the final draft was never shared collectively. Once the final draft was revised and not shared collectively with all of the service providers that are in this very room and even on the phone call. And again, and to not have that resistance to change, I honestly believe that we really need to go back and reassess this, and as to how we could better properly put revisions in here. And in turn, I think a lot of the issue here that was mentioned by some of the service providers is in this case, with the schools, with with NTU and Dene College, having to provide, the educational component through internet to our constituents that are in the higher education area, now is going to be told to be a co-locator onto existing towers and start paying fees. And then not only that, but the impact here that I see, and that was also expressed by my colleague here, Honorable Simpson, is it's going to increase, the fee to our constituents. Are they ready? Right now, I am already hearing a lot of concerns regarding the hikes of the utility increases, by the electrical companies across the Navajo Nation. And some of them are, in the higher dollars. And with that, how do we properly structure this? There has to be medium here. So it's hinge kids. So I'd like, Division of Natural Resources, Division Director, Mr. Halona. We got Eti Shopwood here with GLAD, Navajo Nation Land Department. We have Mr. Bitsui online. We have NRTC team here, and we also have some on the line, commissioners and also executive director, and the folks here that spoke on behalf of, their entities to work at this at the soonest date possible. Recommendation is, I don't know who wants to take the lead here, but I really would recommend Mr. Charlie. I'm sure you got contact numbers for everyone, and come to a location to discuss this, and please send the day and date to Resources and Development Committee. We're not going to be running the meeting like this in a session, but I want everyone to be respectful to one another. Ashonde, in order for something to work and structure, because there's other areas that was brought up in regards to and you're the expertise behind this. We're not. So again, we do need that expertise at the table and allow opportunity at a really good competitive base level. So again, this really needs to be brought back to the table one more time, and I definitely will feel comfortable. Because right now, I know that we're just in our, fifth month of, being in this leadership capacity. And I still hear concerns. And to me, it does bring grave concern. And I just want to do this rationally, knowing that, okay, at this last meeting, everyone had their say. And whatever the final draft is going to come to RDC, I know that there is already legislation out there, but there is a ways to address, this legislation. But right now, Resources Development Committee just really encourages and highly recommends going back to the drawing table and redoing this ashonda. Koto ein hinch ke kashe what's the unemployment percentage rate here on Navajo Nation? It's higher than the national average. It's probably in the mid 50 percentile. And those are who is going to be impacted. That don't have the education to go into workforce. How do we explain this to them? I know that we're going to be hammered here, you know, as Resources and Development Committee, but let's go back to the drawing table again. And again, you can't have it all. You can't have the Mercedes-Benz at the end of the day. You're going to probably have to end up with the Chevy Silverado. So there's a give and take. You all have to understand that too. So we have to all think out of the box. You know, there has to be give and take. And I really commend Mr. Halona. Why I say this is because he's been dealing with so many land issues, disputes, all mission sites and everything. And I know where he's coming from. And that's what lies within our area as Resources and Development Committee. You know, we've got 110 municipalities, I call them, but they're called chapter local government units that are looking to RDC, you know, hopefully to make some of these changes. You know, with all these developments, is, you know, a lot of it is their concern and in impeding on grazing areas too. So there's so many variables to this. It's just not one. You've got to understand that our job is not easy. Sure, we want to make everyone happy, but there has to be a give and take at the end of the day. So with that, so I'm going to go ahead and have Mr. Charlie take the lead with the departments under DNR to do this. Mr. Honorable Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of RDC. Cat, not a good afternoon, so long ago, Cat. So, it's okay. And I'm looking through the comments that were provided by AT&T, Verizon, Secret Wind. And I know Mr. Malone states something that all the carriers and service providers here are against this proposed regulation. And let me read off of Secret Wind communication comments here. The publishing of the regulation are a good step in establishing certainty and expectation for operators waiting to construct telecommunication tower construction on Navajo Nation. And the opportunity for operators to comment on the regulation demonstrates that Navajo Nation is receptive to specific objection. I mean, if we're looking at these, and the way I interpret this is that we want to be part of this discussion. And they did submit their comments, but there was no response back on these comments. I know we went to, as I mentioned, resource management plan amendment in Albuquerque 2 days. BLM had to comment back on those comments, had to respond back on those comments. There's nothing here. Then let's go back to T-Mobile. T-Mobile commends the Navajo Nation for taking this important step by streamlining its policy and procedures. So I think, to me, again, going off of what's stated by T-Mobile's comments, it's okay to have this regulation be proposed, but here are our comments. There's no response back from Navajo Nation or Vertical Bridge. So it shows us that, yeah, you can use their comments, but we're not going to take it because there's no response. I don't see no response to these comments. So I agree with Madam Chair to go back. You guys all come back together and discuss these comments. How can we incorporate? Not all of them can be incorporated into the proposed regulation, but like I said, I think all the entities that Madam Chair stated come back. You guys need to come back together and tweak these. What needs to be tweaked in these in this proposed regulation. So that's shown the data. And let's get this thing passed. And no, I mean, once it's tweaked, everybody's agreeable to what's how has been done. Because if we don't do that, if we have a lot of questions, I'm not sure if it's just if RDC has the final authority or no key. If it goes in the key, I guarantee there's going to be a lot of questions. And it's going to be like, I know certain entities would lobby the certain delegates and questions will be raised, but if we all work together and come to a agreement on this proposed regulation, I think it'll be less question and get you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Simpson. We again like to request that. So the sooner you all come back together and discuss this, the sooner it'll come back to RDC and go from there. I think we had everyone's input already as it has been allotted. And again, it's really what these regulation is stating what is in the best interest of the Navajo people. I get it that Navajo Nation, a lot of the folks there within 1 square mile population density is way higher. Here, it's sad to say on Navajo Nation, we're the size of Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin. And it's unfortunate that we have a higher unemployment rate. A lot of our households don't even have that high income. They don't even meet, the median income bracket, but more or less at the what they call the federal poverty guideline of $12,000 or less. So these are the areas we need to think about. So case talk about it rationally. And we're looking forward to a final product, a final deliverable to say where we as Resources Development Committee members can be confident that our colleagues at Nabigayatia is not going to be questioning, the regulations as well. So with that, members of Resources and Development Committee, I'd like to go ahead and go to item 5, bringing this to the conclusion of the meeting. Again, I believe we have the next steps to make an immediate setup date. So Mr. Tico Charlie, I'd like to ask right now, what day would you be looking at and proposing maybe 2 dates? Within the next 2 weeks? Okay. Hokwashi,
I'm not sure.
Honorable Simpson?
A quick question. Madam Chair, I'm not sure, maybe you can answer this question. Has the legislation been dropped? I mean, documents been dropped for legislation?
Honorable Madam Chair, Madam Speaker Curley she dropped a legislation. Honorable Simpson?
Madam Chair, can you a request from you to Madam Chair to hold off, to Madam Speaker to hold off on the legislation until we get all this resolved here, then we can move forward, because it might be a new maybe a new revision of the regulation here.
Okay, yeah, thank you for your recommendation, Honorable Simpson. Mr. Tahi?
Madam Chair, members of RDC, yes, Speaker Curley is going to drop legislation regarding 2 cell towers within her community. When I spoke with her directly, I did indicate RDC will have final authority over that legislation, and I would be recommending to RDC to table that legislation until these teleregs are put in place. So we're not rescinding any resolutions that are going to come forward before RDC. Since RDC has final authority we can make a note in the committee reports that no further action will be taken until the telecommunication regulatory regs are put in place. Madam Chair, members of RDC, that my comment for that question by Honorable Channing Simpson.
Any final comments, Honorable Clough?
I think that just my request with the accounts and then finding out information on that case, that would be something that's interesting to me. And then also how it would go into which business units when they do get the regulations. And then also, I think that with the separation of powers that you had mentioned, if we can get, our legal counsel, take a look at that as well. Before the next meeting, that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Not on the Honorable Cloud. One final question to Mr. Halona. Has there with the previous, I guess, I don't know if there was some sort of policy or whatever in terms of collection, was there a fund management plan?
Madam Chair, members of resources. No, there is not a fund management plan. All funds go directly to general fund account. So, that's what it's up to the people.
Is this in China? Thank you, Mr. Halona.
Other beings.
So with that, Mr. Charlie,
There, I think gave a portion of them, try to go in 2 weeks. The day on that is on June 1st, which is the holiday. So you can go with June 8th, and that'll give it everybody.
I'll be in Washington.
Resources and Development Committee is going to be in Washington, DC, the first week of June. I think we're all going to be coming back on the 8th. But this is you all's task and project. So 8th, so okay, so with that, members of Resources and Development Committee, I call for adjournment at 12:20 p.m. And again, thank you everyone and your concerns and is our interest here, and we just want everyone to have a clear input and with these telecommunication regulations to be clearly defined in language to where everyone is going to not object this, but go forward and working with these regulations. Although and have yourselves a blessed afternoon. And then to callers on the call here today, thank you for joining us today. And I believe we have our next steps identified for June 8, 2023. Mr. Charlie will be sending out information